Now guys, I understand that right now we are in the midst of the Wano Kuni arc. Presumably we still have many chapters left. We don't know how it's all going to play out, but in the recent chapters of One Piece, something was revealed that has me more thinking about what will happen after Wano. So let us talk about the slime ball himself, wet-haired Caribou. Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, I failed to mention this in my first reaction to the last chapter, but in the last chapter of One Piece, we can see, kind of low-key, but not really, Caribou located in the very same prison as Kid and Luffy. If you guys do not remember who Caribou is, essentially Caribou is the guy that we got to meet just after the time skip. He was looking to take out Luffy and get his bounty, and then he followed Luffy and crew all the way to Fishman Island, where since then he's been basically a scrub joke character. For me, he's the equivalent of Buggy in the New World, but just because he is a joke character for the most part in most of the scenes that he's in, does not mean that he is not important. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that everybody on YouTube probably has already talked about this, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it just in case somebody missed it or for whatever reason only watches my channel and has forgotten about, what has happened to Caribou to sort of lead him to reach the prison that he is in now. Essentially, if you are anime only or recently caught up, you wouldn't know this because Caribou's story after Fishman Island transitioned to the cover stories. If you haven't read the cover stories, I highly suggest that you do because there's all sorts of good details in there. I think that they're generally entertaining and funny, and the cover stories always eventually tie back into the main story. Just some examples of this from the past is we got to see Kobe and Helmeppo after they were introduced into the story train under Garp before we knew that Garp was Luffy's grandpa. And obviously they came back into the story. We got to see what Lucci was doing after Eni's lobby, Jinbei on his way to Whole Cake Island. We got to see how Buggy ended up in Impel Down. And of course there are several others, but this is just in general I think one thing that anime onlys really miss. And so before this last chapter, Caribou's cover story was just one of those cover stories similar to maybe Enel traveling to the moon that had yet to tie itself back into the main story. But yeah, if you guys do not recall the end of Fishman Island, essentially Caribou ends up fighting and losing spectacularly to Peckham's and Tamago. Then we can see him in the cover story go to an island owned by Kaido. He then confronts one of Kaido's subordinates and defeats him, ends up joining a revolutionary army on this particular island, not like the revolutionary army, but like an island-specific revolutionary army. And finally, at the end, he is defeated and captured by X-Drake, who is now a subordinate of Kaido, and X-Drake takes him to Kaido, which is how obviously he ends up in this prison now. But yeah, all of this I think is only mildly interesting by itself. The only real significance for Caribou, the only reason that we really care about him in the story up until this point in time, is because of what occurred in Fishman Island and what Oda has set up for the future story of One Piece. As you guys will remember, in Fishman Island, we got to learn that Shirahoshi is the ancient weapon Poseidon. This was something that Robin deduced and was confirmed by King Neptune, and the only other person in the story who seems to be aware of this fact is Caribou, who overheard their conversation. At the time in Fishman Island, Caribou was rounding up mermaids in order to sell, and then he had this bright idea of capturing Shirahoshi as well because, she's the ancient weapon Poseidon. That is useful. Obviously, it did not end very well for him, but possession of this knowledge is powerful. It is a big deal. There are so many characters in the story of One Piece, whether it be pirates or the world government, whatever their affiliation, that can make better use of this information than Caribou, who is frankly inept. The lore and the mythology of the ancient weapons in the One Piece world is that these are entities or weapons that are capable of destroying the world, and of course many people are going to want to use that or stop it. And so I personally think that Oda has pretty much telegraphed how this is all going to become relevant. Caribou is not going to keep this information to himself. He is going to tell somebody at some point in time. In fact, Oda even went so far as to have Caribou think to himself. He does not just want to tell anybody, he wants to tell a specific somebody. Now granted, we do not know who this is, but just based on my experience reading One Piece, this somebody who Caribou was thinking about is going to become the person who will utilize this information best. They will be the person who ultimately ends up going after and potentially even capturing Shirahoshi. And of course, this will inevitably involve the intervention of the Straw Hat Pirates because Shirahoshi is their friend. And it has all sorts of additional significance because of the set up relationship between fishmen and humans. They already do not like each other. They already do not trust each other. And attempting to capture their princess is, in my opinion, going to be the final straw and the culmination of where this is going in the story. I actually talked about this specifically a long time ago in a now privated video. I think that was shared by Gambia's grandmother, but I'm not exactly sure. But you can see sort of the relationship, the parallels between originally the Arlong Park arc and where this could be going in the story. The Arlong Park arc, very similar to the Fishman Island arc, was about the relationship between humans and fishmen. But really, in many ways, it was the opposite. It was more of the human perspective of this conflict. Where Arlong was created because of all of the wrong that has been occurring to the fishman, he has then become what it is that he hates, and treats the humans that he has encountered very similar to how humans have treated his kind for hundreds of years. So the Arlong Park arc represents a reversal of roles, where the humans present in Kokoyashi Village are really the fishmen in Fishman Island, and Arlong represents what typically the humans have done. Or more specifically, maybe he represents the world government. And this makes it all the more interesting sort of how Kokoyashi Village reacted to all of the wrong that Arlong had committed. Just the same as the fishmen in Fishman Island, the people of Kokoyashi Village sort of dealt with the fact that there was really nothing that they could do and live with this tyranny. They can't defeat Arlong, just like the fishmen can't defeat the world government. So you just kind of live in fear and anger. But there's more similarity because in both cases, both for the fishmen in Fishman Island and the residents of Kokoyashi Village, there was something to look forward to, some hope on the horizon. For the fishmen, it's eventually being allowed to live on the surface with the humans, given protection and freedoms, which they hope to obtain within the Reverie. And for the residents of Kokoyashi Village and Nami herself, which they were aware of, it's the possibility of earning enough money, being able to give Arlong enough money for him to just leave. But as you guys will know, that is not how the story played itself out, because Arlong essentially lied to Nami, as Nami was getting so close to finally getting enough money to be able to free the village. Arlong sold her and all the money that she had stolen out to the world government for them to steal so that she would have to start over. Arlong was essentially saying to Nami and the village, you will never be free. This broke Nami. She had attempted to lie to the villagers and joined with the enemies in a desperate hope to save them, and it was all for naught. It was all wasted. It was all useless. Whatever hope that Nami had for a better future in that moment was crushed. And this is where we get into, I think, future parallels that have not yet manifested themselves, but I do think that they will eventually. When the villagers found out that Nami was lied to, they decided that they had had enough. They understood that there was no way that they would be able to defeat Arlong, but they would rather fight and die and lose than continue living this way. So they picked up some weapons and marched on Arlong Park. And if it were not for the intervention of the Straw Hat Pirates and Luffy, they all surely would have died. There is a ton of parallel here, guys, but the first that I want to throw out to you is the idea of hope. The people of Kokoyashi Village had a hope, a belief that there might be better times in the future, something to strive for that would not entail violence. And this is a shared sentiment with the residents of Fishman Island. Yes, they are oppressed by the humans. The royalty and the world government look down upon them, but the thought is that they want to live up on the surface, and by interacting with them, then they would reach a common understanding, a realization that we're not so different. This dream and this plan does not require any violence. And this is another similarity. Both Nami and the fishmen have joined up with the enemy, even though they may not like them, for what is essentially the greater good, a way to achieve peace without violence. And so with all these similarities, I think that for me, it's a pretty safe assumption. What it is that I definitely believe, just as Nami was lied to by Arlong, the residents of Fishman Island are going to be lied to by the world government. Whatever hope that they have now, whatever peace they are seeking, is not going to come to fruition. It is going to require violence and the intervention of the Straw Hat Pirates. And I think that it is impossible to think about this story going forward without thinking about Shirahoshi, the reincarnation of the ancient weapon which the world government fears. The knowledge of whom this useless joke character Caribou possesses, and will share eventually. There may end up being other reasons, but this by itself justifies the idea that the Fishmen and the world government will never settle their differences, at least not without help. And I think that the stakes for the Fishmen is extremely high, because as was confirmed in the conversation between Neptune and Robin, which Caribou overheard, the genes of Poseidon is carried down among the Fishman kings, which is to say the power is inherited. And if you are the world government who fears the ancient weapons and you do not want to see them return ever, then your only recourse really is to destroy and mass murder, genocide the entire Fishman population. But even before you take that step, you have to handle the problem at hand, which is the existence of Shirahoshi herself. The world government, in my opinion, once this knowledge becomes public, will go after Shirahoshi. At this point, any promises that they have made to the people of Fishman Island will be broken, and just as is the case, or just the same as what occurred in Kokoyashi Village between the residents there and Arlong, the people of Fishman Island will pick up their weapons and go after the world government. Will they expect to win? I do not think so. But this is a cause probably worth dying for, and Luffy will probably save them. But let's take this conversation back to Caribou himself and the Wano Kuni arc. As I said earlier, Caribou basically said that there is a specific somebody that he wishes to tell. And I very much doubt that this is somebody who works for the world government, or at least openly does. It's probably a pirate. Caribou himself is a pirate. I'm certain that there is a specific pirate out there in the world that he respects, that he may want to gain the good graces of. So I don't think that the story is going to go that Caribou is going to tell the world government about Shirahoshi and then they go after her. I think it's more likely that Caribou tells a pirate who then goes after Shirahoshi. From these events, then the world government becomes aware of Shirahoshi's existence and power. But before we get to speculating who this pirate could be, I think that it is important to explain something. And so, in the theory beforehand, where we are comparing the parallels between the Arlong Park arc and the Fishman Island arc, a key concept here is the idea that One Piece is repeating itself. And I think that I probably need to explain this in depth. So what I mean when I say that One Piece is repeating itself is that there are various general concepts to each of the arcs pre-timeskip. For instance, in the Arlong Park arc, you have the struggle between humans and fishmen. Oda then takes the idea behind that arc and then subtly changes it, while carrying over many of the exact events. Now, this is incredibly hard to explain without showing you the panels themselves, which I will not be doing right now because of the whole copyright issue, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. But essentially, Oda literally takes exact panels from pre-timeskip and then uses them again, obviously drawn new with new characters and such, but it's the same panels. A good example of this, which you can look at your own time, is when the Strats are traveling to Fishman Island. Luffy encounters the Kraken, who he then punches and tames, which is almost the exact same thing that happens as the Straw Hats are traveling to Arlong Park. They encounter Mumu, the sea cow, who Luffy punches and then tames. And then both the Kraken and Mumu end up becoming relevant at the end of each of these particular arcs, both of which have pre-established loyalties to the enemies, Arlong and Hody. There's also significant parallels between the mothers, Otohime and Bellamere, in the flashbacks of these two arcs, both of which are in opposition to the main villains of this arc, both of which get their arms broken, and both of which eventually get shot. There is a ton of examples of these parallels throughout the New World, I'm not going to list them all, but I just want you guys to know that they exist. What Oda is doing here is he is emphasizing the parallels which absolutely exist between the pre-time skip and the post-time skip. But again guys, One Piece is repeating itself, but not exactly. Oda changes very critical things. As we've discussed already between Arlong Park and the Fishman Island arc, he completely twists the conflict on its head. Before, it was the humans versus the evil fishmen, and then in Fishman Island, it's the fishmen versus the evil humans. And really why this is so important to me, and specifically speculation, is that these parallels are in order. Which is to say that things are paralleling themselves in the new world as they were before the time skip. Now granted, this is not in every little case, but for the general plot points which I think are most significant, this is true. So now talking about the Punk Hazard arc, what it really was it was a segue. It was an arc that led up into the arcs that would follow, in this case, Dressrosa. What Punk Hazard parallels is the arcs that lead up into the Alabasta arc. And Alabasta and Dressrosa parallel each other. As you guys remember from the pre-time skip, in order to escape Logtown, Luffy and crew were essentially sent away from the island because of a storm that Dragon created. Going into after the time skip, after leaving Fishman Island, the Straw Hats are carried away on a particular stream which has in its name Dragon. While in this stream, they are carried on the noses of giant sea creatures, in this case whales, and after being carried away because of Dragon's storms, they end up on the nose of sea kings. After the time skip, Smoker ascertains the Straw Hats' location by intercepting a radio transmission, which is exactly how Smoker was able to locate the Straw Hats before the time skip and arrive in Alabasta. I also think that it's pretty interesting that both in the Alabasta arc and in the Punk Hazard arc, Smoker ends up being jailed and captured with the Straw Hats. If you guys recall the Whiskey Peak arc, which was really the introductory arc for the Broke Works, the Straw Hats were knocked out because of the food that Broke Works members gave them, which is very similar to at the very beginning of Punk Hazard, the Straw Hats were knocked out due to sleeping gas. But yeah, again guys, there are far more examples than this. Just the takeaway point here is that Punk Hazard parallels a little bit of the Alabasta arc and the majority of the arcs leading up to Alabasta. Dressrosa and Alabasta are absurdly similar. In both cases, you have pirates, Shishibukai, whose objectives are to become the rulers of a country by lying to its citizens. In many ways, Dressrosa is like a what would happen had these Straw Hats not arrived to save Alabasta. Dressrosa would have been their future. You have a huge damn parallel at the end of the arc, which is, if you remember at the end of the Alabasta arc, the world government essentially lied about what had occurred there and gave the credit for defeating Crocodile to Smoker. But in the Dressrosa arc, Fujitora refused to take that credit. Again here, this ties back into the concept of things are paralleling, things are repeating, but not exactly in very significant ways. This is just another example of Oda taking a concept, repeating it, and then twisting it. So yeah, hopefully at this point, if you didn't already, you understand and agree with the concept behind the idea that One Piece is repeating itself. So we'll go through the next bit much faster. The Zou and Skypiea arc parallel each other. An island up in the clouds where great information about the poneglyphs is revealed. A central aspect to both arcs is the idea of where somebody's allegiance or loyalty lies. Oda was deceptive about it with the Minks and the Samurai, and deceptive about it when it came to the citizens of Skypiea. The Whole Cake Island arc is paralleled by many arcs, but sequentially we're talking about the Water 7 Enies Lobby arc, the Thriller Bark arc, the Sabaody arc, and the Amazon Lily arc, as well as there are parallels to the Bharati arc, which is not in order. And so for Wano, it seems pretty clear that its parallels are going to be with the Sabaody arc, the Impel Down arc, and the Marineford arc. Now guys, that does not mean that there isn't going to be others. I expect there to be other parallels. They may not be in order, but these I believe are the most significant. And so it's pretty obvious why I think what I think. When you think about the Sabaody arc, you're thinking of the arc of the supernova, which is gearing up to be what I think that the critical to the Wano Kuni arc. You also think of the arc of complete and utter defeat. Another thing that I see happening, but yet hasn't been paralleled quite yet. If you're talking about the Impel Down arc, I think the parallels are pretty clear. We've already talked about how, for me, and I think others as well, Caribou is the Buggy of the New World. And where did Luffy end up encountering Buggy again? In Impel Down. Where did we see Caribou now? In the prisons. The big thing about Impel Down was going in and then escaping, and as you escape, you free everybody else who is in there, which is exactly what I see Oda leading up towards right now in the present Wano story. Talking about the possible parallels between Wano Kuni and the Kaido arc and Marineford, this is the most obvious of the bunch. Oda has even gone on record saying that this arc will surpass Marineford. The big thing about Marineford was the culmination of so many different forces. And that is precisely what the story seems to be leading up towards here. You have potentially the Marines, you have the Minks, you have the Samurai, you have the Big Mom Pirates, the Kaido Pirates, the Beast Pirates, the remnants of the Whitebeard Pirates. Everybody is going to be here. Honestly, I believe the Kaido arc is going to be just like the Marineford arc. The big thing, though, is it's going to be bigger. There was a lot of people present in Marineford. Kaido's arc is going to have more. And so, guys, the reason why I am bringing all of this up, the reason why I'm explaining this again, is because I want you to understand my thoughts. And this is a theory that I have talked about in the past. This is my particular belief. When I say that everybody will end up showing up in the Kaido arc, I mean exactly that, everybody. As I have already explained, Oda takes a concept and then repeats it and twists it. And looking at the Marineford arc, I think that there are several concepts that are just ripe for twisting, that would just make the community lose their minds. A natural progression of the story and heightened stakes. If you guys recall back to Marineford, you'll notice that the Supernova actually played a role in that arc, or they were present, but they didn't actually interact at all with the exception of Law at the end. They were merely onlookers. In the Kaido arc, it seems pretty clearly telegraphed that they will not be onlooking, they will actually be participating. And there are two other characters that were present in the Marineford arc that could do so much more in an alternate universe of Marineford. I'm talking about Blackbeard and Shanks. Blackbeard used the events in Marineford to acquire a new power. I think that he is going to do the same in Kaido's arc. He is going to show up and he is going to acquire a new power. But you'll notice in Marineford, when it came time to really go down and fight, Blackbeard decided it wasn't yet time for that. I think in the Kaido arc, it will be time for that. If you're talking about Shanks, Shanks showed up to stop the war. I don't think that there's any stopping Kaido's war. I think Shanks shows up, attempts to stop the war and fails, getting caught up in it himself. Another reason why the Marineford arc ended when it did was because at the time, Sengoku was Fleet Admiral, and Sengoku is a relatively good person, but Sengoku is no longer Fleet Admiral, now it is Akainu. So when Kobe or Shanks or anybody else attempts to stop this war, Akainu is not going to be as agreeable. And I think that it goes without saying that, as sort of foreshadowed, I believe, from the Reverie arc, the Marines will be present. Which means just the same as the Marineford arc, I believe Kobe will be there and may attempt to play the same role that he did in the previous arc, but obviously not as successfully. In addition to this, you have an interesting connection between the Revolutionary Army and the weapons that Kaido is currently making in Wano. This potentially suggests that the Revolutionary Army may make an appearance in Wano, just as they were there in Marineford, but again, increasing the stakes. Before it was just Ivankov and Inazuma, but now it may be all of them. So you could possibly have Sabo playing a very similar role or something akin to the role that Ace played. And if you guys recall, Sabo vowed to be there for Luffy, where he couldn't have been there for Ace. Luffy is in his time of need. It's additionally possible that Luffy plays the role of Ace. His Vivre card, which was conveniently brought up at the very beginning of this arc, will play a crucial role, I believe, in drawing his allies to him, including the Grand Fleet. But another big thing about Marineford that was, in my opinion, lacking compared to what could be, is that Luffy was essentially by himself. His crew members were not with him. They are here now. And another really important progression is, all things considered, in the Marineford arc, Luffy was completely outmatched against the top tiers. I don't think that that is going to be the case in Wano Kuni. Going back to potential parallels between Impel Down and the Wano arc, we know that in Impel Down, Luffy was badly poisoned by Magellan, and I think that something similar is going to happen in Wano with Caesar's poisonous gas weapons, which may not end up affecting Luffy, but might affect everybody else. Another theory that I have relates to Big Mom. A huge component of Marineford was the idea of the changing of the guard. The ruler of the New World, Whitebeard himself, old and sick, it was his time to go. I think that this is the time for Big Mom to go. Probably Kaido as well. At the end of Marineford, Luffy was saved by Trafalgar Law. Another theory which is common within the community is the idea that Law will save Luffy in the Wano Kuni arc, possibly using his abilities to save Luffy's life, at the cost of his own. Which I also think in various ways could potentially parallel everything that Ivankov did for Luffy throughout the course of Marineford. But another similar aspect which is greatly changed is that Ivankov's abilities in a way stole Luffy's lifespan. I believe that Law's abilities would actually add to Luffy's lifespan. Speaking of almost fights in Marineford that I think are going to happen at some point in the story, and now would be a great time for it. In Marineford, Blackbeard said it wasn't yet time for Shanks. If Shanks arrives in the Wano Kuni arc and the fight progresses further, then you could have a Blackbeard versus Shanks fight, possibly culminating in Shanks' death. And maybe this is the arc in which Luffy finally returns the hat to Shanks, as was another almost thing that happened in Marineford. Some of you out there might think that JB is getting carried away, that he's wilding right now. But I really don't think so. These are things that I genuinely think could happen, and in my opinion, based on what we know and the parallels between pre and post timeskip, may be likely to happen. This simply stated just fits what Oda has already established as the template for the New World. Repeated events twisted in very significant ways. I think the only real criticism that you can throw at this is it even possible to have an arc this huge? And I don't make it a habit of telling Oda what I think that he can or can't achieve. And based on what we already know, this is what we should expect. The greatest arc in the history of One Piece that will put Marineford to shame. But guys, let's bring this back to Caribou. As we've already established, Caribou, in my opinion, is the Buggy of the New World, and Buggy actually played a pretty significant role in Marineford. During all of the calamity, Buggy became a very famous person, as he was broadcasting himself to the entire world. Maybe this is Caribou's role in Wano, to broadcast in one form or another what he knows to the entire world, the identity and location of the ancient weapon Poseidon. With everybody that I suspect that will find their way into Kaido's arc, I think that the person that Caribou intended to tell about Poseidon will be here. And as I've speculated earlier, I believe it to be a famous pirate. And my guess would be Blackbeard. And this may be just another reason to believe that he will eventually show up. And so here's essentially what we already know. If we assume that Caribou intends on telling a pirate, it is likely not to be Kaido. Because if Caribou intended to tell Kaido, he would have already, and I think that we would have seen some sort of fruit of this. For a long time, it was speculated that Caribou, in order to save his own skin, would reveal this information to Kaido so that Kaido would not kill him. But as we can see now, Kaido doesn't really kill the people that he captures. So I don't think that it forced Caribou's hand. In addition to this, in order to speculate anything at all with any amount of confidence, I think that you have to find some connection between Caribou and whatever pirate or person that he wishes to share this information with. He was very, very specific. And the only connection with any pirate that I can find for Caribou is Blackbeard. Because all we really have from Caribou is his actions. And for some reason, at the very beginning of the New World, Caribou was interested in capturing Luffy. Why Luffy specifically? It just makes me wonder that just the same as he wants to share the information of Poseidon with a specific person, he decided to capture Luffy again to get in the good graces of said specific pirate. Kaido had no previous history with Luffy at the time. Big Mom had no previous history with Luffy at the time. Shanks has no desire to capture Luffy. The only person with history is Blackbeard. At least of pirates that we know of that really fulfill the reputation that Caribou gives us as to who he wants to communicate with. So again, going back to other theories and things that Oda has dropped that we know will become significant at some point in time, we learned in the Fishman Island arc the idea that Fishman Island in the future will be destroyed, and Madame Charlie thinks that Luffy will be the one who is responsible. In the past, I've made theories on this at length, and I don't really want to get all the way into it, but I think that we can all agree that Luffy wouldn't intentionally destroy Fishman Island unless it was in some way beneficial. But regardless, considering where Shirahoshi sits in the story and her future, I think it's pretty clear, pretty easy to speculate that the information that she is Poseidon being revealed to anybody could possibly result in the destruction of Fishman Island. And it may in fact end up being Blackbeard. Not that I believe that Blackbeard will destroy Fishman Island, I do think that Luffy will destroy it for other reasons, and we'll talk about it maybe again in the future. But Oda will probably try to sell the idea that Blackbeard will destroy Fishman Island. Because of course, intuitively, it does not make sense for Luffy to be the one to do it. But if he is the person that Caribou intends on telling, I think at the very least, he will go there and capture Shirahoshi. Possibly immediately after Wano Kuni. Meanwhile, I think that this is a big deal in the story from a thematic or a symbolic point of view. Fishman Island is Luffy's territory. As we learned at the end of the Whole Cake Island arc, Luffy now is essentially considered by the world to be a Yonko, even if he is not ready yet. I've also speculated that I think that the majority of the Yonko will all be defeated in Wano Kuni. Kaido, Big Mom, and Shanks. I think by the conclusion it isn't far-fetched to believe that Luffy might be considered still a Yonko. At this point, he will have everything required of the position. He will have an innumerable number of subordinates. He will have actual territory in the New World and have the fame and prestige. But obviously that would depend on what exactly occurs and how much of it the world actually knows. But theoretically, by invading Luffy's territory, Luffy's turf in the New World, Blackbeard will be declaring war against him, leading to the final war to decide who really is king of the New World, between the last two standing candidates, Luffy and Blackbeard. Now guys, understand that there are other things that we expect to happen in the story that are necessary before we get into Luffy versus Blackbeard. We need Elbaf, we need something between Kid and Luffy. And so the timeline or the rate at which these things happen may be slower than I expect. But all things considered, I think that this is a reasonable sequence of events, missing things in between. And at the center of all of this is that One Piece is repeating itself and Caribou. I do understand that not all of these thoughts are canon, and some are more controversial than others. Speaking specifically about Big Mom, a lot of people expect her to show up in Elbaf. They believe that it is necessary. I disagree, but I understand the thoughts. But this is just my sequence of events during and after Wano, ignoring the end of the Grand Line and finding Raftel. But yeah, guys, that is pretty much what I wanted to talk about and discuss today. This video ended up being insanely long. Huge shout out to everybody who made it to the end. In fact, if you made it to the end, I'm just curious how many of you made it to the end. Feel free to comment hashtag One Piece Greatness, just so that I know. But yeah, guys, share your thoughts, share your headcanon, like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.